Welcome to Snow Talk, where the Snow and Ice Management Association brings you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. This season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX. So settle in and let's talk snow.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. Today's episode is sponsored by Western Snowplows. I'm Cheryl Higley, Director of Education and Content for SIMA, and I am excited to learn a lot from today's guests. A little bit of background. Our April issue of Snow Business Magazine focused on mergers and acquisitions in the snow and ice industry. But if buying or selling isn't in your future, keep listening. My guests are going to help us take a step back and talk a little more specifically about building a financially healthy company. So when that time does come to exit the business, you and your company are ready. Joining me today are Jennifer Murray, who leads the valuation and financial advisory practice for McFarland Stanford, and Vince Torcia. Did I get it right?
Yep.
Vice President of the Grow Group. Awesome. Welcome to Snow Talk, Jennifer and Vince.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, let's just give me a little bit of background on both of you, kind of the expertise in both the industry and in this area that we're going to be talking about, just a little bit for our listeners.
Sure, I'll kick it off. So by background, I am a banking professional and private equity professional. So I come at this from that angle. I started working with professionals in the snow business and landscaping space about 5 years ago. And I've had a great time really getting to work with business owners on things like increasing their valuation, cash flow metrics, and just preparing their companies to better weather swings in profitability.
Yeah, and Jennifer and I are very lucky to work together in many capacities that we work in. And so I've been in the industry since 2011. I started working with Marty Grunder at Grunder Landscaping Company and the Grow Group, where I worked not only, again, with Grunder Landscaping Company, but landscaping companies all over the country. And then I got a wild hair at my you-know-what and went back to law school later on in my career and have been using that legal knowledge as a way to continue to work with our clients in both the snow season and the green season about their future planning, which, as you know, for this April issue, M&A is all over all that. So Jennifer and I are very lucky to work together and get to see tons of different companies in all stages of that process every year.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump in. So health, that is a pretty subjective term. In your work with landscape and snow companies, what does financial health mean to you? What are you looking for when you're talking with companies in terms of their strengths and their weaknesses?
So from a financial perspective, generally there are good years and bad years. Some years it snows a lot. Some years it snows not so very much. When I think about a financially healthy company, I think about one that has enough liquidity to manage through the rough patches. They have a good handle on their cash flow, where it's coming from and where it's going, and an ability to make money in most, maybe not all, but in most markets.
Yeah, and I think, Jennifer, kind of in conjunction with that, really what we see from a health standpoint is that predictable and precise decision-making. If we don't know our numbers and don't know what's going to happen, if it does or doesn't snow, we may not end up in a place that we want to be. So when Jennifer and I see healthy companies, they're very good at kind of breaking down the math, breaking down the averages, and having predictable things that they can take decisions from. Hey, if it does snow, great. Here's our execution plan for that. If it doesn't snow, which happens, right, here's how we're going to weather this, right, throughout this winter season. So they acknowledge the good years and the bad years, but they have some sort of predictable math average basis for how they're going to get through it, whether it snows a little, whether it snows a lot, or whether it doesn't snow at all.
You've been involved with our industry for a long time now, and historically, this industry is known for owners who start their companies with good technical, operational skills, a lot of hard work, but they may not come in with that financial background to eventually grow their business, get where they really want to go. When you're working with companies, are there particular areas, especially in the snow and ice industry, that struggle with that in that growth process?
Yes, I would say all business owners that Vince and I work with know their revenues. They know their top line. Everyone talks about their sales. Not everyone is as conversant with their margins and their profits. So understanding not just what you're quoting and what's coming in, but having a better sense for how much of those dollars you get to actually keep at the end of the day, month, year. So I think that's probably a big one. The other one that I see is liquidity planning. A lot of folks measure liquidity by cash in the bank, which is a great source of liquidity, the most liquid source, but also building bank relationships, having additional capacity on your credit cards, just having some rainy day sources of funding that can bridge you through some of these lean times that we've talked about.
Yeah. And Jennifer, the only thing I'd want to add on to that is starts with ownership, starts with leadership, knowing their numbers beyond just revenues and margins, but how all those numbers make up and what levers they can pull, and then getting comfortable enough to then go share them with their team. And I know open book management is a topic we'll probably discuss a little bit later on, but keeping it with ownership really just satisfies ownership and leadership. And getting really comfortable with those numbers allows us to then share more information, which allows our team to become better educated, to have them then going and making decisions on behalf of ownership. Just like to your point, Cheryl, about technical expertise, a lot of people started off, right, plowing on sites, doing all those things. Then they got really good at teaching other people how to do that. They sometimes don't teach other people how to look at a P&L or look at financials or look at healthy things related to numbers. Some of that can be because maybe they're not confident with it. Some of that can be they perceive their team maybe doesn't care about it. We always encourage owners to surrender to both of those thoughts and say, if you build it, they will come kind of attitude. Let's share the numbers with them. Let's share what we're learning about financials with them to help them connect more dots, to Jennifer's point.
Just kind of an aside, we're in the middle of judging our best places to work in snow and ice. And one of those categories is what kind of training do you give your team outside of that field education, and financial management is one of them, not only professionally, what's going on with the companies that they're working for, but also in their personal life as well, just to give people a good understanding. I think I probably need to take this training. I'm not super great at it, but yeah, that's what we're seeing is a lot of people are starting to offer that to their teams. Jennifer, just going back to your banking experience, and you mentioned it just a little bit about the importance of liquidity and cash flow and access to capital. With your experience, how about up and coming snow companies? You're coming in, you've got maybe a couple of trucks and you're looking to grow. You're probably going to need equipment to do that. You're going to need more materials, more labor. What kind of advice can you give those kind of companies that are looking to grow to make them attractive to lenders so that they see them kind of as a good risk, so to speak? Or are there other capital avenues that they should be considering in addition to banks?
I mean, it's a great question. I think every banker everywhere loves to see a plan. So a business owner that has put together a strategic plan, certainly for the next few years, but ideally 5 years. Bankers like to see folks that have a vision, who aren't just kind of asking for resources towards a goal that's unclear. And so my best advice is to build, doesn't have to be complicated, but kind of lay out how you think your revenues are going to build over the next 3 to 5 years, what your investment in trucks is going to be like, when you're going to layer on people. And the fact of the matter is the plan will never, ever happen like you think it's going to happen. But the very act of planning really kind of helps you articulate to outside capital providers your vision and that you've been really thoughtful about what you're asking for. And so going in with that kind of specificity, I think gives business owners a tremendous leg up in their conversations with lenders.
Is there anything that we should talk about, staying on the lender piece just a minute, in terms of how you build relationships with those bankers? I'm guessing not every lender understands the snow and ice industry and kind of how unpredictable it can be. Is there anything to that to, just educate the bank, the lenders to make sure that they understand what's going on in our industry?
Yes. And I think particularly for businesses that are a little bit younger, they're really going to have to cast a wide net in terms of the banking institutions that they reach out to. You may not find a banker willing to lend you money, the very first one that you reach out to. You may have to talk to 4 or 5 or 6 or 8, but you kind of have to keep educating your customer base, the customers in this case being banks. I generally say that for smaller businesses or those that are kind of younger, it's better to go with local lenders who perhaps understand the individual and are willing to kind of grow with that business. Folks, I think, immediately think about, big name banks or even regional banks. And so it's fine to reach out to those, but I'd probably start with a handful of local banks and then just tell your story as many times as you need to tell it to kind of get a banker on board. But you're going to have to kiss a few frogs in that process.
I'll say to Jennifer's point that different companies have different levels of relationship with those banks, and understanding in your market which maybe banks or credit unions also are not only great partners for you, but could introduce you to future business. That has to be considered as well. So I think we're certainly looking, to Jennifer's point, to check all the boxes related to their ability to be a great banking partner. It is a bonus, though, if the Cleveland Credit Union or the Dayton Credit Union or the Milwaukee Credit Union or the Milwaukee local bank is really supportive of local industry, and you being involved with them can also help get you involved with other companies that they bank with. So every market should at least have that kind of antenna up to say, number one, I need to have a great banking partner. The cherry on top is, can this banking partner also be a great business partner for me?
Great. Yeah, great point. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break and recognize our sponsor for today's podcast, which is Western Snowplows. We will be right back, and we're going to talk a little bit about the future.
When plowing is your profession, it's up to you to keep the world moving through winter's worst. Less time worrying about your equipment is more time for clearing lots. So we'll cut to the chase. Only Western builds efficiency into every feature of our plows and spreaders. With 65 years of experience behind us, we know what it takes to save time and stay profitable. So we make one promise: more jobs done faster.
Okay, we're back with Jennifer Murray and Vince Torcia. So the last few years, and we talked about this at the beginning, it's kind of been feast or famine, mostly famine, for most of our snow professionals in terms of serviceable events. We've had some companies didn't drop a plow once this year. We're starting to see changes in weather in certain places, event types, whether it's more rain, more ice, more mixed events, longer duration storms. How would you counsel a company to maybe protect their financial well-being with all of these uncertainties, and maybe the way they used to do things can't be the norm anymore, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for businesses that have been around for a while, they should maybe consider leaving a little more capital or cash in the business than they would have historically. So if you've had a great year, traditionally you kind of pay yourself a big distribution and feel good about the fact that you could kind of rebuild that. I think when business gets more volatile, it's just good to have a little more cash hoard, if you will. So maybe for business owners who have been around for a while, they might think about leaving a little bit more in the business. Back on the banking relationship topic, I think, again, for folks that have been around for a while, it's not a bad idea to add a second or even a third banking relationship. Start to think about kind of a backup or a diversity of funding sources. You may not feel like you have enough business to spread around initially. I hear that a lot. But bankers like to do all sorts of things for business owners. They like to have checking and savings accounts. They like to do cash management. They like to do wealth management. And so maybe you start with a few accounts at a new bank and build that relationship just in case you find yourself with a liquidity crunch and your current bank's not able to kind of bridge that gap for you. Yeah.
And I think, Jennifer, what I would add is that we have a ton of peer group members in the Philadelphia market, right? And what a weird snow season, lack of snow season, right? It has been for the last 2 years. Finally got some this year, which is great. They're all feeling a little more comfortable. But what we're having conversations about is getting back to more of and it's more difficult to do, but from our position, it's the right thing to do, is have just a longer term horizon on your planning and expectations for weather. People have a bad snow year and they always think, man, like, is this my year to be done with this? I'm so over this. I can't believe we didn't get snow again. Then they have a great snow year and it like erases all of those negative thoughts from the previous year, which in some ways is very good, right? Because we want to continue to move forward on a positive way. But we're just trying to have people have realistic conversations about the fact that weather is cyclical. It will snow more some years and less some years. But over a 5-year horizon, for example, what on average is going to happen? And if we can stomach that risk of knowing that it's not going to be great every year, But over 5 years, generally, we're going to have a more balanced portfolio of snow. Then we can make decisions and then not get frustrated with ourselves that it didn't snow in 2024. Okay, well, as long as we catch up our averages by 2025 and 2026, we're going to be okay. We had a little bit of a calculated risk there. So we try to remove the emotion of it because it really is, as you know, such an emotionally driven thing. It's coming in the winter. It's coming around holidays. It didn't come. We needed it to come, all those pieces, and try to step back and say, let's play the average game, right? Let's plan our business based on averages. We're going to win some years and we're not going to win as much other years, but let's have our team understand that concept.
That kind of goes back to the beginning conversations, which is knowing your numbers. You have to know what those averages are. And some are even saying you need to go back a little farther than 5 years sometimes just to see that wider picture. It's been so volatile the last few years, but definitely knowing what you've gotten yourself into and what you might have to look forward to is certainly a good idea. Coupled with that, our industry is very overhead heavy. It can be in terms of the equipment, the materials, all of that. So you still have to be ready, Vince. You have to be ready to go, whether it snows or not. Anything there on recommendations on how to manage through those expenses, especially if it doesn't snow?
Yeah, that's a very difficult one. And again, every owner and every team is going to apply their own amount of risk tolerance to that, coupled with just kind of how liquid are we, to Jennifer's point. What's our access to capital? What are we willing to take on, right, from an overhead standpoint? And so some of that kind of lives with everybody and they have a different perspective on that. But the perspective that we've been taking is, okay, well, let's control what we can control, right? So we can't control how much it snows, but we can control how much square footage that we want to have in our portfolio. We can control what percent of that is contract, what percent of that is per push, what percent of that is for maybe if you have a green side of your business, right? What of that can be balanced out on the green side of our portfolio? What 5 or 6 hospital networks or large commercial properties do we want to get no matter what? And because if we can get those contracts or secure those deals, and then we know that we can take on those overhead expenses because we have these kind of anchor properties or anchor snow contracts in our business, it just becomes easier to stabilize those pieces. But to Jennifer's point, really, what I will continue to go back to is this rainy day setting aside cash for opportunity. Because it's not like mowing when, oh, well, it rained and we'll mow Cheryl's yard next week. Like, no, this snow has to be gone, right? We have a contract, we have a deal. If we don't do it, we're not only liable, but we're never going to get a shot at this again. So number one would be, let's still focus on what we can control. Let's go get the anchor projects, go get the anchor properties, go get the square footage that we need to know from a math perspective will allow us to be profitable, even at, right, minimal snow or less than average snow. All while coupling that with Jennifer's point of being very conscious about this cash conservation so that when things come and when we have these overhead expenses that we can weather those storms. But I'm always going to look first at what can I control, and that's my portfolio and the balance of it.
And I would just add that timing is super important. So it's not just I've budgeted this much for the year, but really thinking strategically as an owner about the right time to make those expenditures. So, an example, if you have a transmission go out on a truck in the middle of snow season, that's a pretty urgent spend, right? You're going to have to do that right away to make sure that you're ready to get out and fulfill your contracts. If you have a transmission go out on a truck in May, less urgency, right? You might be able to conserve cash for a few months and maybe not make that investment until, late August, early fall. Again, you're still going to spend the money. You've budgeted and earmarked those funds, but just not spending them any earlier than, frankly, you ought to can give you some unexpected liquidity apart from your cash balance and your banking relationships.
We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, which is more and more of our Simon members we're seeing starting to practice that open book management. Talked about being more open and forthright with their employees to achieve that buy-in, almost an ownership mentality from their team members. They see how their work impacts everything. Do you see this as a way to kind of grow using your biggest internal asset, which is your team?
Yeah, I think that and I can speak from like Grunder Landscaping Company, for example, right? And our ability to grow the company because of other people wanting to better themselves and have a career has been based on sharing more information with them. And them looking at our business and saying, oh, wow, now that I know this, I see if we go get these snow contracts, if we have this equipment, if we go do this, there's more opportunity in our company, which means there's more opportunity for me. And I think owners tend to get a little nervous about, well, if I share information with them, they may think we're making too much money. They might think we're making no money. And oh my gosh, how am I going to get paid this winter? And we have to sort of surrender to both of those and say, that's a culture question. That's not a financial question, right? If we share numbers and our team is too happy or too mad, that exposes a culture issue for our company, not a financial issue for our company. But really that is their ability to then connect dots to see where they fit in the larger part of the organization. And also, I'm taking the mindset, Cheryl, that it's just the right thing to do to educate the team on financials, right? That's what most of us would want if we worked at another company, to understand what's the score? How are we keeping score? How do we know if we're winning or losing? If we went to the Milwaukee Brewers game and there was not a scoreboard, I don't think I'd be so interested, right? We kind of need that, right? It's kind of in all of us to want to know what's going on and if we're winning or losing. So we always try to coach and remind and share experience that when we share more information, we are exposing more opportunity for our team. And that's just a very positive way to lead.
Totally agree, Vince. Totally agree. I do think it's important when you're disclosing information to your team to tailor that disclosure to kind of the level of understanding of your team. Some folks, when you start to talk about margins and expenses, either their eyes glaze over or there's an anxiety that they don't understand this. And in some cases, it can create uncertainty about job security and things like that. So you just want to be as clear as you can. What you disclose should be easily understood by your team. And as Vince said, there should be pretty clear goals. If this, then that. And I think that's how you get the team to kind of get behind what you're trying to achieve financially and help you grow.
That's a great point. And one of the things that we didn't talk about a little is those metrics and having those goals and the metrics to measure, benchmark. Can you go into that a little bit about how often you should set them, how often you should change them, kind of what that looks like?
Absolutely. So we always start with an annual review of numbers, right? So having a plan for the year and having those annualized numbers, starting to Jennifer's point before with revenue. Revenue is a number that team members can understand and get behind, coupled with, right, as we go higher in the organization, a little more specificity around margins, right? So what is our margin on that revenue and how do we achieve that? And oh, by the way, what is our margin per service, right? Whether it's salting or plowing or whatever service that we're offering, what is our margin per that? And how does that make up the overall margin of the work that we're trying to grab? So we have an annual view of that. And then we have to break that down into more of a bite-size increment for the team to easily understand how that big number is made up of a lot of small things that happen across the year. So certainly a natural one would be monthly. So, hey, if our goal is to have 10 million square feet of contract or under contract for snow, on average, we know that we sell most of that square footage between April 1st and August 1st. And so we want to have more than 70% of our square footage sold by August 1st for the following winter. That's a way to start breaking down those numbers and to start talking about them with the team on a monthly basis. And then during COVID, we started this process of a monthly State of the Union, if you want to call it that. So every month, everybody on the team would be clocked in and be paid to listen to a State of the Union update at our company. We called it the Grow meeting. It was an opportunity for our team to grow, but we named it that. And so every month then they got a really good download of all the financial information that was occurring up until that month, and then what that meant for our future goals. So if you could imagine in our April Grow meeting, for example, our first quarter would have been closed out. We would have been talking about performance in the first quarter, revenue performance, margin performance, sales performance, but then also taking a look at future perspectives from our team based on what's happened in Q1. So, hey, we're ahead of our goal. Great. Let's stay ahead of our goal, right? Or, hey, we're off on our goal. That means we got to make this up now because we can't make up that goal in December. Our cake is already baked by then. So for us, taking that formal monthly 30-minute all-team State of the Union meeting, it might sound like a lot to some listeners to do that every month, but we felt that was the easiest, best way for us to connect with our team on information sharing. So everybody gets that State of the Union once a month, and metrics are a big part of that meeting.
Jennifer, when I was reading about you on your website, one of the things on there is that you've had work with maybe struggling companies, and that, there is that link between operations and financial success. Can you give me some thoughts or examples on what you mean by that?
Yes. And so kind of back to our conversation around timing and building a plan. When I've worked with companies that have struggled, they'll have an annual budget or annual goals, but they don't have a clear picture of timing. And so just breaking the year down into smaller units. You can start with quarters, then work backwards to months. And then in some cases, depending on the, situation of the company, we've even gotten to kind of daily and weekly numbers, because you're that careful with your cash flow when you're going to get paid for this and when you're going to have to turn around and write a check for that. And so the more granular you can make your plan, the more likely you are to kind of tie the operational elements of your business to your cash flow, because you're thinking day by day about when those operational activities are going to turn into cash.
Although it can be difficult, just facing the reality of the situation is just the first step for any of those companies, is acknowledging maybe we're not where we want to be, acknowledging, to Jennifer's point, some of the things that we have to do to climb out of this, but doing that with an attitude of, we are going to get through this and we are going to make it beyond this. And this is a blip in the season of our company, in the season of our radar, but to be realistic about where we are. When we see companies that don't come to that realization or try to soften some of that tough conversation that has to happen, they never fully get through it. So again, it goes back to culture, but really coming face to face with those brutal facts, as some would say, is the first step to getting out of them.
Great points. Back to our cover story in the magazine, the cover story itself, we talked to a lot of people. There's a lot of buying, selling, consolidating going on in the industry right now, both on the landscape and the snow side. And Jerry Schill, President, CEO of Schill Grounds Management, in his portion of the story mentioned that every business should be built to sell, and you can never start too early. Can you share some areas that companies should focus on so that they are seller ready, whether that's 6 months from now, 6 years, 20 years from now, so that they're ready to go when it's time?
Yeah, I can kind of kick us off here. I think, the number one thing that buyers are looking for is businesses that are well managed financially. So to beat a dead horse here, liquidity, strategic plan, I would say a leadership team. Companies that have a team versus kind of a hub and spoke management model where it's kind of one guy in the middle making all the decisions. The ones that kind of have a team in place are going to achieve higher valuation and just have more interest from buyers, because they're buying a team, not a guy. And that can really have an impact on buyer interest. I would say, again, just kind of having a strategic plan in place. And the more professionally managed your company is, the more attractive it's going to be to buyers. They like to buy businesses, not just individuals.
I might add too that I think, Cheryl, some people would get nervous about talking about with their team because their team doesn't understand what that means to them, or how does that. I work for Jennifer. If Jennifer sells and Jennifer goes, where do I stand with this whole process? And again, if you're part of what I'm sure Jerry is championing with his teams, is this is about sustainability of the business and creating opportunities, right? So we don't have to sell if we don't want to, but setting ourselves up to do what Jennifer mentioned, to have good financials in good shape, to have a true leadership team, to focus on the stability of revenue, that kind of rises tides for all boats in the organization, right? Because that just means that we're more attractive as a company. And because we're more attractive, there's more opportunities for us. So I would not shy away from being open with your team about that in a positive way, but you have to frame that in a way that your team will understand that they're going to benefit from this process as well. Whether you sell at the end of the day is not the first thing, or is not relevant to everybody, but the journey to build a company worth buying, right? That would have meant that you've created opportunities for your team and they've wanted to stick with you and grow along with you throughout that process.
How does switching off from the financial side of things, how important is it on that operational side, since you're buying a business, that there's systems, processes, all of that in place? So if the owner goes when he sells, she sells, that there is a business that can still keep running. Is there anything to that in terms of valuation?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Processes, systems, training programs, all of those things are critical elements that can just really benefit sellers in an M&A context. What a buyer is looking for, and this is true whether it's private equity or another industry player, is just repeatability of sales and profits. And so that is easiest achieved when there is a process and a program and a way to onboard employees consistently across either business lines or geographic locations. So you're absolutely right, Cheryl. Those elements of strategic planning are super important.
Anything that we haven't talked about in terms of financial health, becoming seller ready? Any words? In theory, the winter season is finished. It's time to start, you should be planning now. Is there any advice as we kind of say goodbye here that people can, whoever's listening could take with them going into the spring, summer, fall?
Jennifer, I'll hit a couple things and I'll let you wrap it up. But again, it feeds into financial health, right? But from an operational perspective, would encourage everybody to do their debrief from the winter. What went well? What didn't go well? What are we certainly not going to repeat and have that happen again next year? And what are the good things that happened, right? A lot of us in those meetings, me included, tend to get very focused on the negative, all the things that we did wrong. But let's do a proper debrief, right? Let's have pizzas in the day with our snow team and say, hey, what went well this winter? What should we change for next year? Is there a wish list for equipment, or is there a wish list for things we want? It doesn't mean we can do all those things, but rather know about it than not know about it. But I would encourage everyone to do a formal debrief, right? With an ability for everybody to kind of download what happened in the winter. And then one thing that we've learned from a financial health perspective is you have to be planning all year long. That is a non-negotiable for a well-run snow organization, is that every month of the year should have a focus of something related to long-term planning. Whether right now you're looking at equipment, now you're looking at financing, now you're looking at banking relationships, snow contracts, again, those anchor properties that you want to have. I'd encourage everyone to look at each month and say, in a perfect world, if we did this month, that would really set us up for success in the future. But do focus on the plan. And back to Jennifer's points, really focus on the financial health components that she discussed in those monthly verticals that you have. So from my perspective, Cheryl, if you debrief with your team and you focus every month on a strategic item, your snow season will go smoother.
I think everything Vince said is spot on. I would just add anything that you can do to minimize your cash volatility is a good thing. So snow season's over, but there's other things that you can do with your trucks. There's other ways that you can stay busy and make sure that there's revenue coming in. And so revenue diversity is another thing that's really attractive to buyers, so that you're not just a one-trick pony. You do snow, you do mulch, you may do landscaping, you may do lighting. All those kinds of things can help reduce your reliance on a killer snow season every year. And it will make you stronger financially and ultimately worth more as a company.
Vince, back to you have to be planning every month. I love the idea. It's almost planning for a whole year can be very intimidating, especially for a smaller company that doesn't have all of those resources that, as you grow your team, you grow your support team. That to me seems like it could be a little less scary to take things, but you still have to have a plan of what you're going to talk about in February, in June, what you're doing in August. I just want to say I love the idea of breaking it up like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And get a couple of your team members involved with it. It doesn't have to be everybody all the time, but you can pull some key people in and they'll be good accountability partners for you, but it'll be good to not feel like you're alone in the planning process.
Excellent. Okay. Vince, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope our conversation gave our listeners some good advice to at least start to think about things if they haven't been. And if you're ready to grow, I think we've given them some good advice on what they need to be doing next. Thank you again to today's sponsor of the podcast, Western Snowplows. And we will talk to you again soon on the next episode of Snow Talk.
Thanks for listening to Snow Talk, sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX. Check out all of our episodes at sima.org/podcast.